Let's now discuss some of the validation errors you will encounter when adding records manually online or submitting batch files to CalPads. In this first SELA error scenario, I'm planning to report a student with a TBD record. So I go to student data, I enter the SSID, click on search, and I see the student detail for bar transit. So the student has been enrolled with us in 8/7/2017, went to Palo Alto, and came back to us. Okay. Apparently, no one reported a SELA record for this student, and so it is my responsibility to check if that's true. So I go to Student English Language Acquisition, and true enough, Palo Alto never reported the student, and unfortunately, I haven't reported the student too. So I'll just click on Add a New Record, and I go to Status Start Date, and I'll just put in here the status that I had for the student when they first started. So do this. So the student English language status start date is 8/7/2017. This might not fly, so let's go 2017, August 7. Okay, and then I'll put a TBD, and then put a correction code here, evidence of non-English, and the student is Spanish, and I click on validate, and I get this seemingly plethora of errors. So I look at each error, and so I'm clueless on how to resolve this. So what I do is open up the CalPads error list, which you could download from the footer of this page, or of the CalPads page. So I open it up. I go and scroll at the bottom and look for student English language status. And I look for GER 7. So I can just filter for GER 7 here. And this is what I get. So apparently, there was a code submitted outside the effective date range. So it says here, understanding the error, the values that can be submitted in a field must be effective in CalPads. The code must be submitted with an ELA status start date that falls within the CalPads effective date range for the code. And the fields validated, or the fields you need to look at, are all the fields. So that's a little bit sketchy. But then it says here, look at all the fields and look at the ELA status start date. So I minimize this and go back here to the record, and I see the status start date was 8/7/2017, TBD, and the correction reason code, English 1 and Spanish 1. But then if I look at the other errors here, there's a pattern. So I have a GER 7, and then it says an invalid use of correction reason code, and then evidence of non-English primary language correction reason code requires a previous English-only ELS code. So these are just some of the other errors that I see. So if you remember, we had rules on using the EL correction code. The EL correction code should only be used if, number one, the status date of the record that you're reporting as a correction has a date before or after 7/1/2018. So for this reason, I had it on 2017, and so it triggered both GER 7 and SELA 323. So I guess I either have to change it, or if I still want to maintain this date, I'll have to remove the code I use for the correction recent code, because I shouldn't be using this code for any SIGA record with the status date before 7/1/2018. So I validate that, and it validated successfully, and now I can post the record. Okay, so just a reminder, if you're getting a GER 7, it could be any of the codes used here in in relation to the start date. So you probably have to look at the effective date of the codes. If it's not the correction code, you may want to go to the code sets and check if that code is effective or is still active as of today. Otherwise, you may use a different code for any of the fields be triggering that error. So now another common error that LEAs encounter is a GER 5. So how is GER 5 triggered? So let me just add a new record here. And as I've mentioned, this student never had a SIGA record in CalPads. So I'm using a date of enrollment in their initial year, because it was my responsibility to report the student. Anyway, so I had 8/5/2017. I believe that's when the student enrolled with us, and we determined through the home language survey that the student is not an English speaking student at home. And so again, we already learned that putting a correction recent code for a record before 7/1 triggers an error. So we just leave that as is. We just choose Spanish for the primary language, and I click on validate. So let's wait for the system to validate, and I trigger a GER 5. GER 5 is an ownership issue, meaning you're reporting a SELA record with the status date beyond the student's enrollment at your school or LEA. Okay, so if we go back, notice that I indicated 8/5/2017 for a TBD. So let's just exit out of this, close that, and that should bring out the model. And look at the earliest enrollment start date. It was 8/7/2017. So apparently, I was reporting the SIGA record with the status date of 8/5, which is outside of the student's enrollment at my LEA. Okay, so now let's just go back and add a new record and make sure that we have the correct date. So that was 8/7/2017 instead of 8/5/2017. So let's do that. August 7, TBD, Spanish. I validate the record, and this record should pass successfully. There you go. I just need to post it, and that should help me post the record for this student. So the next common error that you might encounter is the SELA 283, which is the ELAS date mismatch error. So let's add a student's SELA record in CalPads for this student. So I enter the SSID under a quick search, press on this arrow, it brings up the student detail for John Snow. Okay, so right now, I add a student English language acquisition, just add a record, and I use 8/19/2018 because that's the time that the student was enrolled. 8/19/2018, 8/19, August 19. Okay, that's, oh, it should be 9/19. Okay, 9/19. Let's do 9/19/2018. And then the student is EL. And I enter Spanish. And I click on validate. And I get a SELA 283 ELAS date mismatch. SELA 283 is actually not a date mismatch. What it says is that you are submitting a SELA record with an with a SELA status that is the same with another record that already exists in CalPads. Okay, so what is this error saying? So let's just close this. And apparently, there's already an EL record reported by ABC Unified last August 15 of last year. And so I can report my own version of the EL record. If you remember on the earlier slides, there was a section where where I explained that you can only report SELA records during certain scenarios. Okay, if you're reporting a SELA record of a student who already has a record in CalPAS that's the same, you trigger a SELA 283. So what do you do? Now for this scenario, you don't report your version of the EL record because CalPAS only wants one record of a particular ELA status in the ODS. So if the student is still EL, then you just inherit this EL record until the student is tested in LPAC and is determined RFEP. Okay? So now if the student is RFEP, that's the only time you report a SELA record for the student. Until that time, just leave the EL record as is, and this will be reflected on all of the reports associated to the student. Okay, another scenario is SELA 255, which is invalid change in English language acquisition status code. It's just saying that the change that you're reporting is out of sequence. Okay, so how does that normally trigger? So again, let's just add a record for our student here, John Snow, and we use 9/20. Apparently, I should have not reported the student as EL, but instead IFEP. So let's go to August, September 20. Go. And the student is IFEP. And Spanish. And I click on validate. So now I'm getting not just a SELA 255, but a SELA 215. Okay, so let's just address 215 first. It's just saying that the start date you're using is greater than or than the current system date. So you cannot advance date a SELA record. Okay, you can basically backdate it, but you can't report a SELA record in advance of the current date. So let's just change that then. Apparently this should have been 20 2018. Let's do 2018 and validate that again. Hopefully the errors will disappear. That validate. However, we still have the SELA 255. So the SELA 255, as I've mentioned, is just an error that notifies you that you're reporting a SELA status that's out of sequence. So let's look at the record status that we used, IFEP. Apparently, again, if you remember, John Snow was an EL. So you can go from EL to IFEP. However, you can go EL to RFEP without a correction code. So now, how do you address this? Either double check that the status code is correct. Maybe the student might be RFEP, or if the student was indeed IFEP, then you have to indicate a reason code. So going back to the EL correction code table, the applicable reason codes that we could use could be either evidence for EL or IFEP, or rotating score validation process error. So let's try 2 and 5. Click on validate, and it accepted this record. Okay, so you can post it, and that should post the record in the ODS. Again, if the SELA status that you're reporting is out of sequence, it will trigger a 255. You can either use a correction code to address that issue, assuming that the prior record has a status date of 7/1/2018 onwards, and then post. Now, if again, maybe the status code that you're reporting could be an RFEP instead of IFEP. So you have to double check the status that you're reporting for the student. Another error that is common is the SELA 285 error. Okay, how does that trigger? So let's just add a new record here for John Snow again, and we use let's see, August 7. We use a prior date last year. Instead of 9/19/2018, let's use August 7. How we arrived to that date, this is just a imaginary date that we've come up. Okay, let's do 2018, August 7. And then we report the student as RFEP, and the student Spanish. So when you click on validate, you get a GER5, a SELA 255, and of course the 285 that we were hoping to get. So let's address all three, okay? So first of all, on August 7, 2018, the student was in, let's see, Palo Alto. And that's the reason why we get a GER5, because we don't own the student's record at the indicated date, which is 8/7/2018. Okay, and then the next is SELA 255, which is an invalid change in English language acquisition status code, because you can't report a RFEP record ahead of an EL record or any ELA status, because RFEP is the terminus ELA status of a student whose EL or TBD. So you can't do that. And then the third is out of sequence. It's SELA 285. So right now, we have a status start date of 8/7/2018 within RFEP. But if you notice here, let's just go out. The ELA status was reported on 8/15. So you can't report an RFEP earlier than an EL. And that triggers a SELA 285. Okay? So how do you address this? The SELA 285 error. First is, of course, checking the status date. So since we have the student at Berkeley Unified on 9/19/2018, maybe let's just report a student using any date beyond this date. So let's just use September 20 again. Let's use RFEP and Spanish. Since the date is after 8/15, which is the EL status date, the RFEP date is now valid. And since the date that I chose is on or after the enrollment start date of the student at my school in Berkeley Unified, this record is valid as well. So when you post the record, it should go through. And there you go. There you go. You have the notification that it posted, and you have your RFEP status here. Okay, so the student is EL and then RFEP. And this is a legit transition that doesn't require an EL correction code.